Welcome back to the Patio Pondering Podcast, where we're searching for clear thinking in complex agriculture. The modern swine industry is more advanced than it ever has been, genetically, technologically, operationally, but progress always comes with trade-offs. Today I'm joined with Dr. Doug Newcom with the National Swine Registry. Doug has spent decades working across genetics, technology, international promotion, and youth development inside the pork industry, which gives him a perspective that stretches from seedstock operations all the way to global pork production. So this is one of those conversations where we'll probably end up talking as much about people and systems as we do genetics. So Doug, welcome to the patio.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you having me on. I know you've talked to me a few times and say, hey, listen to my podcast, see what you think. And I'm pretty sure I've listened to all of them. I've heard some pretty interesting stories about some people that I know and stories that I didn't know. So I really appreciate you having me on here. And I'll tell you, I've been a little bit nervous about where this conversation was going to go. And I know that you have a script, and I know that you've thrown the script out a time or two. So I don't know if we're going to follow that script or if it's going to get pitched over your shoulder pretty early on and we'll just talk.
Well, I'm going to hit you with double barrel shotgun today to start us off. So, Doug, what has the modern swine industry gained, and what has it quietly lost?
Man, that's a tough question. That's a 410, 22 over under. This modern swine industry has been extremely successful in making a lot of pigs. Reproduction has improved greatly. They're more efficient than ever. I read a statistic, and I don't remember, I'll get the numbers wrong, but I think the gist of it will come through that since the 1950s and 60s, we use X percent less feed, water, resources to produce a pound of pork. I think what we've quietly lost, I think we've lost taste and flavor. I made this comment in a presentation in China that we don't need to chase chicken to the bottom, but I kind of think we maybe already have. It is a commodity. Most people don't know what really, really high quality good pork tastes like. I think we've also lost the husbandry and stockmanship. Coming from a judging team and that livestock background, you understand that we've got a lot of people in the barns that don't know just basic husbandry. And you can be taught what a sick pig looks like and some of those kinds of things. But, I think we've quietly lost some of that as people have, we're 2 or 3 or 4 generations removed from the farm now. And we just don't have very many kids that are growing up in a livestock situation. I think maybe part of your script and where we'll go later is youth development. So I think that comment probably plays into that.
You've hit a lot of things, and I agree with you on a lot of it. The one that really, really hits me most, and I think would appreciate your perspective as a geneticist, is how have we gained so many pigs per litter in the last 30 years? It's just remarkable to me that we're talking 14, 15, 16 born alive. When you and I were kids, we were like, hey, we had 10. That's a great litter.
I think a lot of it, so I'll go back to some of the presentations that I make internationally, and genetics are really, really simple. If you boil it down to the basics, you keep the good ones, get rid of the bad ones. It's just, you have to determine how you value the good ones, how you determine what the good ones are, how those best ones are defined. And I think over the last 30 years, it was probably a little more than 30 years ago when the Stages genetic evaluation system, actually it was about 40 years ago right now, that the Stages genetic evaluation system came into play with the American Yorkshire Club, just collecting the data, running those genetic evaluations, and determining, okay, here's your best animals. Since then, there have been improvements in computing technology, the speed at which we can get those genetic evaluations run, There have been genomics and all kinds of different, trait evaluations. There's breeding stock companies that look at, okay, we've got pigs born alive, but we want to know how many are alive at day 3, because most of our pre-wean mortalities day 1, 2, and 3. I had a professor that said, hey, let's just count the pigs born alive over 1 kilo. So they got to be 2.2 pounds before they count as a pig born alive. And just all of those different genetic tools, I think we've changed nutrition and management. AI has come a long way. We've gone from natural service, honestly, and this is not going to be real popular with some people, but we went to crated gestation, where you don't have sows beating each other up in a pen situation. Heck, just moving pigs inside from outside. I fed a lot of pigs with a 5-gallon bucket of shelled corn and protein pellets back in the day. So just all of those things combined, I think, have led to 13, 14, 16 pigs born alive.
The industry is put emphasis on efficiency, and we can see the paybacks on number born alive and making those females more reproductively efficient. Why hasn't the industry put that same genetic selection pressure on color and marbling?
That's a really, really good question. My PhD was all about this in 2004. So it's 22 years ago, and we haven't got it solved yet. I think a lot of it is, one, consumers, I don't think, understand the difference. There was some research back in the day that consumers couldn't tell the difference between, small differences in color, marbling, firmness, those kinds of things. I think, as corn went to $8, everybody pushed efficiency. And it's really hard to make a pig that is super efficient, really, really lean, but has really good marbling. It can be done, but it's a 20 or 30 or 40-year process. You've got to be able to break that genetic correlation where they put internal fat in, but not external fat. So I think a lot of it is, I was always told, well, there's no economic values for meat quality traits, eating quality traits. And there's not. But there are, there's some places where, there's a baseline of eating quality, meat quality traits where, that's your ticket to admission. I mean, they know when the high meat quality pigs come to the plant. They know when that 160 pigs come off the trailer, and they know when those things go through the line, that's where they're going to get their pork to fill their export orders.
I just wonder how controversial you and I want to be today.
Well, I almost made one comment, and I bit my tongue just for that very reason, because that's one can of worms I really don't want to open.
I think back to an ag econ class I took in, it's probably 1992. And the ag econ professor stood at the front of the class and he said, I really hate chicken because chicken is just a carrier for condiment. And I think back to some of the pork chops that I've eaten, I've cooked. You get out the barbecue sauce or you get out the A1 and you enjoy your pork chop. But on the other hand, I've had some that were cooked to 140. I know it's supposed to be 145, that were just wonderful, and they would rival a ribeye. That is what our industry is missing, that wide array of eating experiences, because we don't have a grading system, and the consumer can't go, oh, this is a prime piece of pork, and this is hamburger pork.
There's, I guess, part of the way I think is, and this has been forever, that, darker pork with a higher degree of marbling offers more forgiveness when cooking it. If you cook it a little fast, if you overcook it a little bit. If everybody in the world knew how to cook a pork chop low and slow to 140 degrees, take it off and let it rest to 145, then the quality we have may be good enough. I mean, it'd be nice if it was a little bit better, but we used to I will say back in my graduate school days, we were doing research. I didn't buy pork chops forever because we had leftover pork from research projects. So, when we moved and I started working, we would go buy a whole pork loin from somewhere. You name the big box store, we'd go buy a whole pork loin, cut it up, 2 or 3 to a package. And, some were a little more forgiving than others, but if you cooked it low and slow, and back then it was still 160, so that was probably a little too high, but you could make one taste good. I think the biggest thing is just that, we've talked about people being removed from the farm. There's a lot of people that don't know how to cook. We're removed from actually the art or technique of cooking meat. So I think it's just, there's more forgiveness. There's more room for error. So if you do kind of screw it up, it's still going to taste good.
But if we circle back to a positive of the pork industry, I was at Costco last week, and I like to look at the meat case. I'm a meaty. See what the ribeyes are selling for, what the brisket's selling for, and then I go to the pork section. And this woman grabbed a full tray of whole boneless pork chops, center cut boneless pork chops, and I caught the price. They were $2.39 a pound, and I said to her, that's the best deal in the whole meat case. It might be the best deal in the whole store. And she looked at me. She's like, give me this inquisitive look. Like, what do you mean? I said, that's the cheapest protein you can get. It's better than chicken. It was cheaper than the chicken was. And she was like, well, I didn't realize that. But she actually got a second one. So I think that's a great story for the pork industry. $1.99 for a whole loin. You cut that thing up into pork chops or roasts, and you've got a week's worth of meals for a family.
Well, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of commentaries and those kinds of things. And the thing about it being $2.39 and beef's what, $12, $15, $18 a pound? There's a lot of room for pork to be more expensive.
Oh, I agree.
There's whatever that price difference is, we're not $15 a pound less taste. I can tell you that. It could go up a few bucks a pound and really not, I wouldn't think, impact things too much, other than if we look at demand being a per pound basis or a value basis, you don't have to add pounds if it's worth $1 a pound more or $2 a pound more.
Yes, and we could add $1 or $2 a pound at Costco as an example, and we would be equal to the prepackaged pork breasts that were on the other side of the meat case.
And still be $12 or $14 a pound cheaper than ribeyes.
Yes. So there's opportunities for industry, which is really good. Now we get more people to taste what pork can do.
Absolutely.
There's my National Pork Board plug. It's real easy for us to get down on the pork industry because we're so involved in it and we're so passionate about it. And we see where we can improve. And sometimes we gloss over the things that are great about the industry, like you brought up with the efficiency and reproductive efficiency. As we look at how the industry changed, did the genetic changes lead it, or did the genetic changes respond to it?
Well, there's some of this that happened before my time. But when we came out of, the lard type pig and tried to go to meat type pigs, we have some things here at the National Swine Registry back when we were individual breeds where they had certified meat sires and certified meat litters and those kinds of things. And if you go back and look at the specs for some of those, a 4.5 inch loin eye and 1.2 inches of fat, I can't imagine what they look like before that. To get that to be the spec for something that would be leaner and more efficient. So, it was consumer driven, and I wouldn't know if there was a nutritional component that led to it, or did nutrition catch up with the genetics. I know that whenever there's an issue, people say, "Hey, we'll just change genetics," and I've always been told that if you have an issue on a farm, you can talk to a geneticist, a nutritionist, a reproductive physiologist, or your pastor of choice, and and your geneticist is the one that it's going to take the longest. Those other two or three, your veterinarian, those other three or four people can probably get things changed faster than what your geneticist can. I don't want to have an ego and say, yeah, genetics drove it all, but I would say genetics had a lot to do with it.
Can you expand on how the genetics did it? Did it start with stages?
That's a very good question. I'm going to say yeah. I'll just come around and say yes. That was in the mid 1980s. I don't know how many genetic programs there were before that. I think the people that started that with the American Yorkshire Club were visionaries and ahead of their time. Breeding stock companies have implemented these kinds of things, since then. I think, Stages was developed as kind of a public-private consortium of universities, USDA. The guts of it and updating were brought in-house here back in the early 90s, back when the breeds consolidated. But yeah, to me, it's one of the first true, system-wide genetic evaluation systems that was developed. I can't remember how many members we would have had back in the mid 80s that submitted information to all that. I know today we have about 14 million animal records in that system. I don't know where that compares to, anybody else in the world, but from a purebred standpoint, that's where we're at now. I will say you can look at record number by year, and from the spring of 1998 to the summer of 2000, the numbers that were submitted dropped significantly, but that kind of happened everywhere, I think.
Was Stages the beginning of the end for the independent seed stock producer?
No, I think in its heyday, it helped our producers make faster genetic improvement. They were good animal husbandry seed stock people that could go out on a farm. You can pick the fast growing, lean efficient pigs with your eyeball better than just random selection. They would keep reproductive records. But again, I guess I haven't mentioned this before, but reproductive records are highly influenced by the environment. So you've got to be able to look at contemporary groups and all those kinds of things. And so, I think Stages helped our members. There was the same boars being used across farms and how do they perform in different places. And so you had, the ability to make more improvement. I think part of the, reduced reliance of commercial producers on our independent seed stock producers, I think one of the biggest impacts was 1998. And, I'll admit that a majority of our members' customers would have been small independent commercial producers. So the reduction in the influence of our membership to produce commercial type seed stock, I think a lot of it came from the fall of 1998 and their customer base disappearing. And it didn't necessarily have to do anything with how good the genetics were or not. It was, these 300 to 1,200 sow producers that were buying boars and gilts, all of a sudden they're not there anymore. And I think there was also a perception that can these small seed stock producers make genetics good enough like a commercial breeding stock company? And can they supply, a 5,000 or 25 or 50,000 sow system, which it doesn't take very many maternal boars to make gilts for a 50,000 sow system. It doesn't take a very big purebred population to do that. But I think a lot of it was a perception. Oh, they're not big enough. They just can't handle this. We had some members, back in the day that got into some bigger systems. They were pretty successful, but then got uprooted by breeding stock companies that, I don't know what the marketing campaign was, but our members' influence has diminished.
I think back to 1991. I worked for a man named Ned Byers, had 250 sows, farrow to finish, outside Fort Wayne. One morning he said, "You have to meet the semi at the corner of this road and show them how to get to the road because we're going to sell a half a semi-load of pigs." That was the first time he'd ever sold a semi. Everything else went to the Parrot buying station in Fort Wayne, and we took them in by straight truckloads. I didn't realize the impact of the semi and then the impact of the box on our industry until I was well into grad school. And the semi and the box led to some of those efficiencies that were the death knell for some of these, the perception of these small farm seed stock producers, because we could say, hey, we've got consistency. We got cookie cutter pigs. I don't know how many times we heard that, cookie cutter pigs, and everything fits in the box. Do you think
I don't know. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the drive for efficiency. Maybe it is. I mean, the consolidation, economies of scale, all those kinds of things, I guess that would be driving towards efficiency. You know, my dad asked somebody back in the day, you know, we had 150 sows, fair to finish. And we took all of our pigs to the local buying station on a 6x22 gooseneck trailer, sides rusted out. I mean, we'd put plywood in it twice. I mean, that's just how we delivered pigs. And he asked somebody, you know, how big a farm do you have to be, you know, if quote unquote efficient, or how many sows can one guy run? And they said, well, you've got to have 300 sows to be able to sell semi-loads. Well, one guy's not going to run 300 sows. My dad did 150 by himself. I mean, yeah, he had kids, and when we farmed, you know, 500 or 600 acres, we had a hired man. But, you know, when it was just, you know, 50 acres and 150 sows, he could manage most of it by himself. Funny story is, I think he would wait till I came home from college about once a month to, you know, castrate, move pigs outside, haul manure, all those kinds of things. So, you know, 150 was enough for one person. 300, one person can't run, but they can take, you know, they can get some of those efficiencies of scale, like the semi, where you're selling 150 or 6. Well, back then you could put 200 on because they weren't that big, but
yeah,
you know, so yeah, I mean, it was. Well, we've talked about it in all facets of agriculture. Get big or die. I mean, that's, you know, people farming 5 or 10 or 15,000 acres. You know, a small sow farm now is 2,500 head. You know, and they're building 2,500 and 5,000s like they're going out of style, or at least they did for a long time, just because, you know, one person can manage way more pigs inside like that than what we could do back in the day with feeding sows with a 5-gallon bucket out of a harvest or silo.
That paints a mental image that many our age are just quivering over.
I'm hoping I don't cause any PTSD for anybody.
And how many of those yellow chore gloves did we go through because they got a little bit wet?
Yeah, and then you hang them in front of the LB White heater in the farrowing house to dry out so you can go swap them out every few hours. Or
even better, you put them on the baseboard heater in your fraternity house room, and then you get beat the crap up because the whole house smelled like pig shit.
I was going to say the defroster on your truck, but that we've done that before.
Oh, yeah. And the other favorite image that I saw here in eastern Allen County was the rubber chore boots upside down between the cab and the bed of the pickup truck. You're like, that's a pig farmer.
I haven't seen that. Well, when you go to World Pork Expo, you'll see that occasionally, but you don't see it near as often as you used to.
Well, as we're reminiscing about some of the things that have changed, what did the great breeders get right before the data showed it?
That's a really, really great question. I think one thing that the great breeders do even now, before we had a lot of data, is feet, leg soundness, and longevity. I mean, I think that's a big thing, is they had the husbandry and stockmanship that, I don't know if data would prove this out, but, they were really good at creating tough, rugged animals before we had data to make tough, rugged animals. They didn't have data. Some of them still would say they don't need data to be able to say, yes, this sow's going to last 4, 5, 6, 10 parities and continue to produce at the rate we need her to produce. Now, a caveat to that is, and in a previous life, I had a customer say this. He said longevity is great, but he wanted to replace all of his commercial sows by parity 3 because the improvements in all of the other traits were worth more than him having to replace that sow. Now, I'm not going to say I completely agree with that, but there was some merit to that your improvements in growth and efficiency and her genetic capability to have pigs, and raise and milk those pigs, rebreed, those should all be better, a year and a half after you received her. So, I mean, there's probably some merit to that. I think it all comes down to economics of what it costs to replace her, get her adapted, all those kinds of things, and how her pigs perform versus a replacement's pigs perform.
Well, with some of the health challenges and death challenges we have in some of the sow herds, he has no choice.
He did not have that problem with the company that I was working for. He was. I won't say that he was. All of his calls were because he wanted to, but a majority of them were.
Well, and I think that illustrates how intricate our industry is, because on the surface, the gut reaction that both you and I have when he said he wanted to get rid of them at 3, well, she just paid for herself. And I if you took her out to 7, every one of those pigs is virtually free. If you go from 12 born alive to 14 in the one that replaces her, I could see the argument and buy into that.
Yeah, I'd never thought of it that way before. I mean, I'd always been taught the longer you kept them, I mean, you had your marginal cost to keep her, but that was it. Your fixed costs were done. At least her replacement cost was done. And when he said, well, yeah, but a year and a half later, the new gilt that I get in, she's going to have a genetic propensity for a half a more pig or 3/10, 8/10, an extra pig per litter. And those pigs will grow X amount faster. They'll be X% leaner, more efficient. And those advantages are what's going to help pay for her faster.
And of course, what Jimmy Dean and Bob Evans are paying for the sow also plays into that equation.
Yeah, when sows are high and market price to replace a gilt is low, there's a lot of turnover. Now, when it's the opposite, you keep every sow you have.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and then you cry when one dies in the crate, and you're like, "Oh, darn it!"
Yeah, we could have sold her for 80 cents a pound.
Yeah, holy cow! We could have bought 2 of her replacements. What are some of the things in our modern system that we consider pressure points, but in reality they're celebration points for us?
That's a very intriguing question I hadn't thought about, and I have one that pops into my mind that may be what floats around on social media, an unpopular opinion. And this may prove that our system is completely broken. I don't know. This is just kind of off the cuff, that COVID showed how efficient we were. That every week pigs are born, every week pigs are moved, every week pigs are harvested. That meat goes through a store. A store doesn't have 6 months worth of supply on their shelf. So I think it shows the efficiency of the system, that maybe I don't know that you never be too efficient, but our just-in-time inventory model is good when it works, but when you have a snafu in it, like COVID, you find out, there's retailers that have gone to multiple sources. They don't ever want to be in that position again. They used to get everything from one plant or one food service vendor. Now they've got 2, so that if something happens, they can double their order with another food service vendor and meet their needs. I may be completely, I may be 180 degrees off on this one, but it does show how efficient we were even to a fault.
Back to a question I was going to ignore, but I'm throwing it back out because what that system missed with the efficiency and the just in time and getting it right, and it's a celebration point for our industry. It happens every week. We're efficient, but we're not resilient. And that same thing can be said for some of the pigs that we're raising. They're efficient, they're lean, they grow fast, but you throw a curveball at them and sometimes they slow up quite a bit.
Yeah, I worked for a company that did some disease resistance, some disease challenge research, tried to find some novel genes or major genes, do some genomic work to try to make pigs that were, we didn't use resistant. I'm not sure we used resilient, but it was, I forget exactly what the terminology we used in the marketing, which, I mean, we're not going to let marketing get in the way of it, or we're not going to let the research get in the way of a good marketing story. But, the gist of it was, there's multiple kinds of pigs in a disease challenge. There's some that just completely, they quit eating, they stop growing, and they're stalled for a month. Well, we don't want those kinds of pigs. There's also a group of pigs that they eat through it, but they utilize all those nutrients to fight the infection. So they eat a lot of feed, but they don't grow. They still stall out. They don't go backwards, but they don't really grow for that 3 weeks, month, whatever, depending upon the challenge. And so the goal was to find those pigs that would still grow, maintain, consume feed, and still grow through that challenge. And those were really the three kinds of pigs that we saw in that research. And we didn't really want ones that just consumed feed to consume feed and fight off the infection. We wanted the ones that consumed feed, fought off the infection, but still put some of those resources to growth. And I'm pretty sure I left before we saw the full impact or benefits of that, that we could make pigs that could handle a disease challenge. You wouldn't go into a finisher and see a whole barn full of sick pigs. You'd still see some of those sick pigs, but you just really wanted those pigs that it didn't really faze them. I mean, if you go to an elementary school during a flu outbreak, there's some of those kids that, it doesn't even faze them. And there's some that get really sick and puny. There's some that, don't look like they feel bad, but they're just really not themselves. And then there's the ones that they're still running around the playground and doing everything they normally did. And they come inside, well, you've got a fever of 102 degrees, but you're still active and doing things, doesn't even faze them. So, that's kind of where, we've made pigs that are extremely efficient. I think part of it goes back to, in the pork system, everything that we do is based in a high health environment. All of our seed stock producers, all of our breeding stock nucleus farms, all those kinds of things are in a high health environment. Some would say pristine and all those kinds of things. They've got great management, but then you send those pigs out to a commercial facility where maybe they aren't in such a high health environment. Management facilities, some of those kinds of things maybe aren't what they need to be. There's some research things you can do to try to get around that. We call that a genetic by environment interaction. Some genetics perform better in poor environments than others. So you can get, one of the things that you can do, you take all your nucleus duroc boars and you breed them to commercial sows, and you track those pigs through a commercial facility. Lots of people have done that. And you can identify boars that at the nucleus farm, the boars rank A, B, and C, but when you get their pigs out into a commercial facility, they rank CBA. And so which boar do you really want? I always make the comment that we're not selecting the next nucleus boar to make the next great generation of nucleus animals. We're selecting a nucleus boar to make offspring that can go out into a commercial facility and produce for a commercial producer.
When I brought up challenge, disease is the first one we think about, but I also thought about some of the, say the curtain didn't come down as fast as it should and you have tail biting with the stress or barometric pressure. There's all kinds of pressures on a pig in addition to disease, and if we don't have that robustness, resilience, ruggedness bred in, we get those pigs that get puny, and they end up being roasters at Wickman for 90 pounds when everybody else is 230.
Yeah, I mean, that's I don't know if that's kind of a philosophical question, but yeah, there are, I mean, anywhere you go, you hear people talk about, well, genetics from source A, they're really fast growth, really efficient. Packers really love them, but, they're pretty aggressive. It'll kill each other. You've got others that, well, they're robust and they can take anything, survive, nuclear fallout, but they're, they grow really fast, but they're a little bit fat. Efficiency's not ideal, I guess I'll put it that way. And I mean, honestly, a lot of that depends on what it used to depend on. It doesn't anymore. Well, I think it does, but not to the same extent that, input costs, they've all gone up. So, nobody talked about feed efficiency until corn went to $7 or $8. And now everybody wants to talk about feed efficiency. Everybody wants to talk about born alive. And we're, our main push is, okay, all those things are great, but is it making you any more money? You can have the most efficient pig in the world, but if they don't grow fast enough, if the packer doesn't like them, if their survivability isn't what it needs to be, your grade A number one pigs, that percentage isn't as high as you can get it. If you're not making any money, it doesn't really matter what all those individual traits are. I've actually got a chart that I show that just for farrow to wean, the impact, the economic drivers, there's like 50 boxes on the slide that all tie together with all different kinds of things on what drives your economics. And yeah, born alive is one of them, but also there's farrowing rate, there's rebreed interval, there's, all those different kinds of things. And it's all about what makes you the most money.
And there you go. We've been talking about genetics and the efficiency of the feed industry, but a farm is a business, and the currency is the pig to get us to profitability. And I think you brought up a great point that sometimes we forget about that when we're looking at these individual lines on a closeout and trying to critique how that group of pigs did, when we need to go down to the bottom right-hand corner and it says profit per pig.
Well, and I had a professor friend shortly after grad school that he used to work with producers, and I think they were feeding cattle, and they had two different rations, and one of them was cheaper than the other. But the more expensive ration, your cost per pound of gain was lower because it was just better feed. But nope, this feed's cheaper per ton. That's the feed we're going to use. And didn't even look at what their cost per pound of gain was, which, they weren't making as much money feeding that, but, their expenses were lower, or if they thought their expenses were lower.
Supposedly.
Yeah, I mean, they were either feeding more of it or they just didn't grow as fast on it to make that cost per pound of gain higher. So you've got to look at all the numbers, not just, well, my feed's cost me $380 a ton this week. I mean, you got to look at bottom line profitability. One thing that that we look at in genetics is what those economic values are. Well, we don't update those every day. It's not like making a ration where we're looking for a least cost ration based on what input costs are today. We can't do that. I mean, we've got to pick economic values. We've got to put an index in place, and it's got to run its course until there's a major disruptor. So when corn goes from $3 to $8, do you make tweaks to your index? You can, but you've also got to look at corn probably isn't going to be $8 forever, which it wasn't. Now we're back down to I guess the new normal of what we think. And so you plug those values in, because anything you select today, their genetics aren't going to make it to a harvest facility for 3 to 5 years, just because the amount of time. And pigs are way quicker than cattle. So, any decision we make today is 3 to 5 years down the road before you ever see what the fruit of that is.
Well, we hit that point in the podcast, Dr. Newcom, where we change a little bit from the talking points. So as you're talking about projecting 3 to 5 years down the road with genetic selection, and we use terms like rugged and robust, in the back of my brain, I'm thinking, that sounds like a lot of judging terms. That sounds like what we're doing with a lot of the programs you're working with NSR, with Team Purebred on the other side, NJSA. Where does the youth, and particularly youth swine showing, fit in improving the pork industry as a whole? That's a loaded question, I know.
It's a very loaded question. I don't know if any of our members will listen to this, but I guess I don't want to say I'm going to tread lightly, because I'm going to give you my opinion. It's all about, from what we see with all the kids that we have, all the sponsors that we have, it's all about talent and making that next generation of agricultural enthusiasts, not necessarily swine, but the next generation of those leaders in the agricultural space. I thought, so I've been here, actually, I started right at probably 13 years ago today, pretty close to it anyway. And we see all of our sponsors want to talk about talent, and everybody talks about labor shortages and all those things. And when I first started, I always thought that, and I don't know if this was naive of me or maybe it was spot on, I don't know. But I thought our goal was to produce a generation that at worst, absolute worst case scenario, was neutral to animal agriculture. I thought at worst, if we put out people that at least are neutral to animal agriculture, we're not going backwards. Now, the number of people that I would put in that classification are pretty slim. I don't know that we have any that have gone to be, adversarial towards animal agriculture, but we're trying to grow a generation of kids that, they understand where their food comes from. They have some husbandry skills, and, they know how to get up, work hard, take those responsibilities and all the things that 4-H and FFA and all those kinds of things teach, and get them interested in agriculture of some sort. Doesn't necessarily have to be in pigs specifically, or even animal agriculture. We talk about, we've got to have lawyers in ag. We've got to have, obviously, veterinarians, nutritionists, salespeople, pharmaceuticals. You can be a chemist in a pharmaceutical lab coming out of this program. And we've had some, there have been conversations where I guess one of our biggest sponsors, we were at their place last week for a meeting, and they target kids that come out of a program like the National Junior Swine Association. They want kids that have grown up, not necessarily on a farm, but they've at least, raised some kind of livestock. They understand, when there's pigs to be fed, you got to go do it. We have biological organisms, and that's just what you've got to do. I fed our pigs and dogs, cats, and rabbits after midnight 2 nights this weekend, just because we had other things going on, and you just do it. You have to leave family gatherings a little early, occasionally, when you got animals to chore. My wife doesn't necessarily like it that I don't like to go on vacations, because we got things to do at the house. Now, once she gets me away from the house, I'm okay. She took me on a cruise ship in the middle of the Atlantic here back in March. So, that's how you get me away from things. But yeah, our program is about raising the next generation. We'll go to World Pork Expo here in, 3 or 4 weeks, and the number of people that are working for vendors in that building that have shown a pig, a sheep, a calf, a goat would astound you. I mean, I wouldn't even want to throw out a percentage, but people just want kids that know how to work and know how to come in and do things, be self-sufficient, be, forward thinking and be able to answer that question. Well, why are we doing it this way? Have we thought about doing it some other way? People of our generation and older don't necessarily think that way a lot of times. What is the old saying? We've always done it that way, and we're not going to change. We're not going to change that. So yeah, I mean, the junior livestock associations, we're just trying to raise the next group of ag enthusiasts. I mean, we're trying to raise good human beings first and foremost, but then trying to raise that next group or the next generation of people that are going to lead the industry.
And my bias, or where I come from, it's I've got a love-hate relationship with the show ring, because I'm from that generation where I had 35 sows of my own, and I sold a set of pigs that I should have kept for the fair, but I needed the money, and understood that we're raising food, and we were those farm kids. What we need to understand is exactly what you talked about. The show ring allows people to get experiences with biological entities that are outside themselves, get some responsibility, have some success and failures, and learn some of those skills that make a person in the world robust and resilient.
We always talk about we use livestock as a vehicle to grow the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can do it with other things too, but, livestock's a better way to do it in most cases. Kids have to get out of bed every morning and they got to go feed, and, hey, I want to go do something else. So that's fine, but you got to go feed first. You've got to go take care of your animals first. So I think there's some of those kinds of things that people just don't understand. I know, and you're going to love this. There's you're going to be shocked. I know there's a disconnect between commercial production and the show ring. There, I said it. And we understand that, and we struggle every day. How do we get our youth some exposure to the commercial swine industry? We have sponsors that have internships that are commercial facilities, and you get kids to go and learn those things. We have our youth leadership conference where kids can come in and learn that, hey, if you want to go into agriculture, you don't just have to be a veterinarian. I mean, there's lots and lots of different opportunities. Growing up, I never knew you could have a job like I have right now. I didn't know it until I was about a sophomore in college, and my major professor called me at 5:30 in the morning and said, hey, there's a professor from Georgia coming today, and you need to visit with him. I go, okay, great. And I hung up the phone. And that really set the trajectory for what I'm doing today. But kids just don't understand that. They think that, well, if I'm going to do something in agriculture, what they see the most of is a veterinarian. They don't see their feed salesman. They don't see their nutritionist. They don't see, their pharmaceutical rep. They're at least removed enough they don't see those things. And, I think we've just got to give kids opportunities to learn there is life after raising livestock, and you can be in the agricultural space.
And I'm going to give kudos to you and collectively NSR for garnering sponsorship from the commercial world.
It's all about talent. I mean, they all say, it's all about talent and where their next generation of employees are going to come from. And I will say, we had a member that called me and said, hey, we're having a hard time finding somebody to come work for us. Do you have anybody from NJSA that would fit the mold? And I asked what they wanted to do. Well, they wanted, this is going to sound really bad, and maybe we'll get some hate mail for this, but they wanted somebody to power wash, scrape pins, do all those kinds of things. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I've done plenty of that in my life. I see, I'm about to step in and get myself in trouble, but that's not necessarily, our kids aren't going to come out of this kind of program they want to go be farm managers. They want to be department heads. They want to be, if they're going to go work on a farm, those are the kinds of things they're going to want to do. And some positions are revolving doors, and you go find anybody and everybody that can do them. Our kids are coming out, wanting to take those. I mean, they're still called entry level positions, but they're a little higher level than what you typically hire somebody for. And, so, I mean, people want just access to our kids, through our youth leadership conference. We have them come in and be speakers. We have resume building conversations. We have, panel conversations about what kind of jobs there are in animal agriculture specifically, or just agriculture in general. And we have some kids that, I mean, yeah, they like showing pigs. They like showing cows, sheep, goats, whatever. And they're never going to come back and do anything in the agricultural space. However, if they're positive towards animal agriculture coming out, they become the buzzword an advocate for the industry. Then, they live in a subdivision in town and strike up a conversation with a neighbor. Oh yeah, I showed pigs when I was a kid. That can open a lot of doors. Sit on airplanes, all those kinds of things. Those experiences open a lot of doors and can, I mean, as we talk about being 2, 3, 4 generations removed from the farm, I mean, there's not very many people left that, one, grew up on a farm. There's a few more that maybe their grandparents had a farm. And a lot of them, it's more great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents that had a farm. And they don't remember any of it. I mean, my kids didn't. In the first 11 or 12 years of my oldest daughter's life, we lived in town. And we didn't move out to a small acreage and build a barn until we moved here.
I think about a young man in our 4-H program, Nate Seibel. A lot of people know Nate. They know his dad, Terry. And he's a generation and a half removed from the farm. He showed pigs. He was successful at it. He's got banners from the county fair, class winners at the Indiana State Fair. He went to Purdue, interned with Mashoffs, and interned with another company. And he's accepted a job with PIC. I would put him up as a success story of youth swine showmanship. He's obviously in it. His brother, on the other hand, did the same thing. He's in real estate and investing, but he's going to have those same stories that you talked about. So my impression of the youth livestock showing has gone far beyond how can we extract money from them through feed and genetics and topicals and show supplies too. Those are exposures that will be really good for agriculture.
My daughter plays travel volleyball, and so we see plenty of those travel ball moms. I hope we haven't turned into one of those. I don't think we have, but and it's funny that just on my daughter's club volleyball team, there's 2 or 3 kids on there that show livestock. Never would have known it when we got into it. I mean, this is a new team this year, but one of them shows cattle, a couple of them show horses. I mean, it just that's so when we can sit down and have those conversations. I mean, some of the other parents maybe feel left out a little bit, but we can sit down and have those conversations, and if nothing else, you've always got those stories to fall back on if the conversation wanes. And I wear National Swine Registry stuff when I travel, and people say, well, what's that? Well, the closest thing I can equate it to is the American Kennel Club. So if you ever watch the Westminster Dog Show, and if you make that connection, they're like, you do that with pigs? Yes, we do that with pigs. Oh, and by the way, we also ship them internationally, and we, our producers produce pigs that will eventually end up in the food chain. So you can take it full circle just by wearing a company logo on your shirt.
A lot of good experiences happen in a barn. That's a phrase that's overused sometimes.
I will say all kids are different. My oldest was eaten up with it. her last year to show at our NJSA events this year, and we actually took 2 pigs to Perry, Georgia for her. I say we took them. I had to find somebody to take them because I was already down there working. And she absolutely loves it. My youngest, I think she does it because I want her to. And it's a good outlet for me to go to the barn and, as my wife says, tinker in the barn. And the only time she doesn't appreciate it is when I travel in the winter and she has to go feed. Other than that, it is a happy, copacetic situation. But, in a couple of years, we're probably not going to have any livestock in the barn anymore. But my oldest daughter says you can't sell the equipment, you can't sell the trailer because my kids are going to do it. So I have to keep all that stuff, and just so she doesn't have to resupply.
But by that time, the stuff will either be new again or it'll be too old that we got to get new stuff.
That's a very real possibility. That's a very real possibility.
Well, we're kind of in the same situation here because we sold the ewes this last year. So this is the first year in 12 years that we haven't lambed on the farm. And the barn is full of feeders and all the lambing jugs are still there. And nobody has said, are we going to sell that yet? Because they know the answer. No.
You never know when you're going to get a whim and say, hey, this guy's got 15 ewes for sale. Let's go look.
Yeah, cheap. Yeah, they're great ewes. Well, it's even worse because now my son works for Dr. Ted Thompson at RSG. He hasn't broached it yet, but there might be a time I say, hey, I found these ewes.
It's funny. We were just there last Tuesday.
Really?
So we have the National Pedigreed Livestock Council, so the association of us, CPS in the swine, sheep, goat, beef, dairy, horse, all those breed associations have our own association. So we got together last week. NSR and CPS hosted it in Indianapolis, and RSG was one of our stops. They showed us around, and I'd never seen a $120,000 ram up close before till that day. Really interesting story. I mean, it was pouring down rain, so we had to stay inside, but it was a very, very good stop.
And you know that $150,000 or the $500,000 ram, he still stinks like the $500 ram.
The facility was amazing. I hadn't seen a sheep facility like that, and it was pretty neat.
So as we round out our talk about the next generation, what are 1 or 2 things that excite you about the next generation in the swine industry?
So we've had conversations here the last year or two. We always look at number of pigs we have entered for a show. And that's always a good thing because that's kind of your revenue stream. However, we've started to change our mindset a little bit that are we maxed out on the entries that we can have, but can we get more exhibitors? So more exhibitors, instead of bringing 4 pigs apiece, they're bringing 3. And we get the same total number of entries. So, as we've gone the last couple of years, we've started to key in on and focus on number of exhibitors. And can we increase that number of exhibitors, number of states? We've got entries coming in for Expo right now, and there's 4 new states that have exhibitors coming this year that we didn't have last year. So, we look at those kinds of things, and then just, trying to get more kids to come to our youth leadership conference, good kids on our junior board, and get them paraded in front of those people they're going to be looking for talent in the future. That's one of the biggest things is, eventually all of us, unless you're independently wealthy, have to get a job. And so, an 8th grade kid maybe doesn't know what they want to do yet, but they make a connection as, they're at a pig show and they meet somebody, and 10 years later, it's like, oh, hey, I met you when I was showing pigs in the 8th grade. So just, that really excites me that we can help that networking, My kids always talk about, doesn't matter where we go, I know somebody. And case in point, we were on a cruise ship and I had on an NSR t-shirt or something. And a girl comes up, hey, I live right outside Lafayette and I show pigs.
No way.
Not that I knew her, but, that was pretty interesting. And then even one more funny, we got to the Bahamas. We had a boat tour for the day. And the boat captain asked us what we did. And, we talked about showing pigs and all that stuff. And he said, I've seen videos on TikTok of a girl with a stick driving a pig around. We're like, oh yeah, we know her.
Yeah. Dadson Farms.
And they're, yes, the Dadson family. And so, you get on a cruise ship, spend 2 days, get to the Bahamas, and your boat captain has seen Karis Dadson on TikTok. So there's some of those things just, it truly is a small world.
When you started with NSR 13 years ago, did you ever think that pig showing would make the New York Times?
I would say, and this is going to sound crazy, yes, but not for the reason that it did.
Okay, can you explain that?
So I would assume that if back 2013, that if pig showing made the New York Times, it would be for something animal welfare related, something disease related, something not what it turned out to be. So yes, I could have seen it happening, but from oh my gosh, these people are beating these pigs and all those kinds of things. So yes, I mean, not that I ever really thought about it, but thinking back, yeah, I could have seen it happening, but not for good reasons like it did.
Not for the serious-faced young lady from California that is a showmanship phenom.
Well, and I mean, Pat McAfee's brought it up on his show. There's just the people that see those around the world. We've heard of people in other countries that are like, oh yeah, we've seen her on TikTok. So I never would have thought that would have been the case. I would have, I not that you want to say this, but there's other videos from livestock production that don't get, they get just as much, they get just as many views, but not for the right reasons.
There's a positive for agriculture in
Yes.
general with what has happened with that social media phenomenon around that family and what they've done, but it's expanded beyond them to seeing others show, and you add in some of the other personalities in our world that have exposed a really conservative faction of our world to different views through like Ryan Reich and other people that have a really good social media presence, have great interaction with the youth and do a wonderful job, that have a different lifestyle than most of the people that they're interacting with. So there's another positive of the show ring.
It's all about supporting the kids. I can remember growing up, we had our 4-H fair auction, and the people that bought your pigs were the people that your dad did business with. That's just how it was. And now, at our events, we've got people that are supporting it that, I guess they don't know the individual kids, but their impact is much further reaching than just that one kid that you're buying the 4-H pig.
Well, we've kind of hit the triangle of what you do at NSR. The one that we haven't talked about is international. And, we met inadvertently in China, Nanjing, together, and it was refreshing because there were 4 or 5 white guys that were 6 foot tall, which was really nice. But can you give us an overview of what you're trying to accomplish internationally with NSR and swine genetics?
So our membership, they've talked about, they've exported pigs around the world for 50 years. And my predecessor, we've had people that have gone on international trips for the last 30 or 40 years. My predecessor really got into it big back in the early 2000s, early 2010s. And so we will go. I mean, I always told people pre-COVID anyway, I was out of the country 4 to 6 times a year. I would go do trade shows. We would have technical seminars. We would do some on-farm visits. Those are probably less than what we did, less now, just for both human and pig health concerns. But just trying to, one, get people to buy pigs from our members. And two, we do have members in China right now that register their purebred pigs with the National Swine Registry. Now, they register those pigs so they have access to the Stages genetic evaluation program. That's where, the revenue stream is the litter registration, but their actual benefit is the genetic evaluation piece. And they're tied in with a member here in the U.S. that is there once a month or once a quarter, just making sure they're doing everything right, just like a serviceman for a commercial operation here. Only it's more, okay, we've got to teach you how to raise pigs, but we've also got this genetic aspect, the data collection, implementation of results. So I've been, I guess since I started, I've been to China the most. At 2020, when I quit traveling for 5 years, I'd been in and out of China, I think 25 times in 8 years, 7 years, something like that. I've been to Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam a few times, Thailand, Colombia, South Africa, Ghana, India. There's a big trade show in Europe that I go to every other year, Eurotier. I'm actually getting ready to go back to China here. I know you're not supposed to date podcasts, but I'm going back to China here in a few days for a trade show. I'll make a couple of seminar presentations there. There was a lot of work done before my time with governments in different countries just to get health protocols in place, to get them open to accepting pigs from the U.S. and what that, negotiated health protocol needs to be. We're trying to expand into other places. We can send 50 to 300 pigs to a lot of different places in the world. When we go to China, it's 1,000, 800 to 1,000. And you tell people that, like, well, man, how do you do that? Well, they go in wooden crates on a 747 cargo plane. It's just, and it's all about weight. So smaller the pigs are, the more pigs you can put on. We've just got lots of irons in the fire, different places we need to go. It's interesting. You meet somebody that might work at the embassy in Beijing, China. Well, the next time you see him, they might be in Manila, they might be in Hanoi, they might be in Bangkok, just as they rotate through those positions every 2 to 3 years. I've been to a couple of embassies, 3 embassies in the world. The one in China is pretty intimidating. The one in South Africa, the one in Mexico weren't quite as intimidating, but you walk in the door and you see a Marine Guard standing there, eyeing you up and down, looking for a threat, and so some of that can get intimidating. I've most of my trips I've gone on by myself, so you learn the ins and outs of international travel and what the best routes are and where the best seats are on a plane, and then they go and they change the configuration on the planes, and your seat disappears and you got to find a new one. But it's been extremely interesting, and I think I might have said this before that I was out of the country 4 to 6 times a year, plus our 2 or 3 or 4 shows a year. So I was gone quite a bit. And about 6 weeks into COVID shutdown, my wife said, "Do you have someplace you can travel to yet?" And honestly, from 2020 until 2025, there was 6 years between my trips to China. We do have a gal there that works for us that kind of took care of things while we were there. And during that 5 or 6 year time period, I went to Germany once. I went to Colombia, South America once. And those were really the only international trips I took in 5 or 6 years. So, we did a lot of international promotion on some websites. We made some educational videos. We still had funding to travel. We just couldn't travel. So we did some educational videos that we've got on our website. We've got those subtitled in 4, 5, 6 different languages. So we just, we've had people that, will go different places and they'll say, well, NSR is still around. Yes, NSR is still around. Some just see the show pig side of it. So you've got to introduce them to our commercially focused membership that are still producing commercially relevant breeding stock. We've got exporters that, they'll take orders and they'll go around the countryside finding pigs to fill those orders. So I never thought sitting in graduate school working on a PhD in genetics that I'd have to worry about international promotion and marketing. Funny story, I did take an undergraduate marketing class at Iowa State when I was working on my PhD. Now, I don't remember a lot from that, but I at least did take it and should have known it at least at some point in time.
What has the 25 trips to China and your travels to other places showed you about the strength of the U.S. swine industry?
I guess what I would say is outside of Europe, every place I've been, they've tried to model their swine industry on the U.S. swine industry. You go to China and you see, and you may disagree with me on this, but you see the U.S. swine industry in the 90s and early 2000s. That's just the picture you get. The facilities are nice, but it's still more of a 1990s, 2000s U.S. model. They're getting closer every day, but everybody wants to compare to the U.S. swine industry. The presentation I'm going to give when I go over there, it's got something to do with suckling pig value, but they want kind of a historical look at the U.S. swine industry from a commercial standpoint and a breeding stock standpoint. So, I've got 6 or 7 or 8 slides that I've put together. I happen to use one of your favorite tools with a few key prompts to go in and at least get it summarized. I mean, I got it summarized so I could consolidate it, because if you go back to the 1950s and try to put together a slide presentation, there's no way. So I've got it consolidated down to 5 or 6, 7 slides. It's got commercial on one side, breeding stock, genetics on the other, just to try to keep the timeline straight. It's already translated into Mandarin, so we're ready to rock and roll. I've got 50 minutes to be able to talk to a Chinese crowd about the history of the U.S. swine industry.
So we're sitting here and we talked about all different aspects of it: genetics, the youth, international, selection processes, selection pressure, resiliency, robustness, ruggedness. How do you feel about the U.S. swine industry as a whole in 2026, preparing for a trip to China?
How do I feel about it? I'm just full of warm fuzzies, Jim. I guess I never really thought about it, from that perspective. I think about, cost of everything are going up, but I also see, okay, corn's not $8, it's $4 or whatever the number is. Bean meal's not $450 a ton. Maybe, I don't think it is anyway. But, I look at hog prices every week, and I look at what the forecast is for the summer, and basically what the market price of my daughter's 2 4-H pigs are going to be for the summer. It should be pretty good. It's just a cycle that ebbs and flows. We overproduce, people go out of business, then we're underproducing, prices go up, people get back in, expand, all those kinds of things. It's just where the troughs and valleys, are they further apart? Are they closer together? All those kinds of things. I'm a big fan of pork quality, eating quality. My daughter asked what kind of pigs she's going to show, and I'm like, well, you're going to show a Duroc Barrow every summer because that's what goes in the freezer. So, those kinds of things. I think we need to gain some ground on that. We've seen that people will pay a premium for a premium product. I mean, people say there's a limit to what people will pay for beef, and I don't know if they've seen it yet. They're still paying it. And I think we can get to a point where there is a premium value for that. $2.39 a pound for pork loin. For something better quality, I'm going to pay more than that for it if I have the opportunity. I think we're in a good place. I don't know that people are making buku bucks right now, but I think this summer it'll get better and towards the end of the year.
Would it be fair to say that your position as somebody that wants the swine industry to succeed, that you feel fairly good about where we are, but we got a few areas we could do a lot better?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think we're in a good spot. We're not. I will say the Chinese market is at historic lows prices, which is not necessarily a good thing. Who knows what kind of traffic we're going to have at this trade show I'm at next week. But, the swine industry, I think, is in a good place. I think, World Pork Expo in a 3 weeks will tell us a lot. I don't know how, I don't go to the winter trade shows anymore. I don't know how widely attended those were, but that kind of tells a little bit about the pulse of the industry too. And yeah, there's a few places we could tweak. Nothing needs a major tear down and rebuild. Just some minor tweaks here and there. I think the Taste What Pork Can Do campaign, I think it's big. I think it's going to do really great things. I think it's taken kind of a shift in mindset from where we were at before. It's funny as I've talked to people at Pork Board about that. They have board members that are like, "Well, I'm not seeing any of this advertising. I'm not seeing any of this advertising. Are you even doing anything?" And the answer is pretty simple, and you know where I'm going. Pretty simple. You eat pork. You're not who we're targeting. We're targeting people that don't eat pork. They don't eat enough pork. We're going after, untapped markets, not people that eat 2x the per capita consumption of pork in a year. And so you've got to get over some of that kind of mindset that just because you're not seeing the advertising doesn't mean that it's not being done. But I think it's a great campaign. I'm excited to see what new and exciting things they have here in a couple of weeks in Des Moines and run with it, I guess.
I've still got a headache from pork the other white meat, and that I think that is a MBA case study in how not to let a marketing campaign become geriatric. And I think we're still feeling some of the pains of that. Heck, I still have a pork the other white meat apron I use when I am on the grill. How old is that thing? But it's still here. So I'm with you.
It's navy blue, isn't it?
It's navy blue with that tan pork chop in the middle. Mm-hmm. You have one too.
I do.
Well, maybe we'll get replacements at World Pork Expo this year.
I got a really cool T-shirt that said "Bacon is only the beginning" last year. So,
well, this has been a great conversation, and as we knew, we would go all over the place and throw the script out and jump back on the script. So it's been a great conversation. You brought it up at the beginning, so you baited us with your preparation for the 5 questions. So I'm anxious to hear what you have to say. So,
well, I hope I didn't overpromise and underdeliver. So I've thought about this. I've listened to, I'm pretty sure, all of your podcasts, and everybody uses the grit, determination, hard work, all those things, and I think it boils down to show up and be on time. If you do that, you're ahead of 90% of the world. Just when you say you're going to do something, do it. When you say you're going to be somewhere, be there. And I think that's something that's stuck with me for a long time. That if you're on time, you're late. You've got to be. And then I was like right on time for this podcast. So technically, in my mind, I was a little late. But just show up and be on time. Get there, get the work done, and call it a day.
If you could have coffee with any historical figure in ag, who would it be?
So I got to thinking about this. I visited with my wife, and I've heard you say this on the podcast about we don't get to see our grandparents in their prime. I said, well, I'd like to, my two grandpas, I'd like to see them in their prime. And my wife said, well, they're not historical figures in ag. I'm like, well, to me they are. So that's one. The other, and I'm going to kind of nerd out a little bit on the genetics side of it, but Jay Lush, one of the pioneers in animal breeding and genetics. I'd love to sit down and visit with him. Some of the equations that he put together early on without a computer, with pencil, paper, and a slide rule. I mean, that I'd love to just sit down and pick his brain. Not that I'm ever going to be able to implement any of that, but just to look at those things. And I think about, what we have at our fingertips today, and the basis of it is all based on what he came up with.
I love your reference to not using a computer, because the sophisticated models we have, regardless of what selection tools, stages, blop, whatever, it all came from somebody having a thought and putting X plus X1 plus X sub 2 equals something. That's crazy to think we did that on paper.
Yep.
What is one quirky or underappreciated thing about ag more people should understand?
Okay, this is what I've thought long and hard about, and it may not be as applicable as maybe what it was when I first thought about it. But, I've always heard, growing up, it was always like, oh, you're just going to go be a dumb farmer. And the more I think about a comment like that is farmers are not dumb. Because you, in a given day, you might have to be a nutritionist, a geneticist, a veterinarian, an agronomist, a chemist, an accountant, a geologist, a hydrologist. I mean, you name it, a mechanic. You've got to be able to do all those things and be fairly proficient at them. Now, I know there's opportunities to outsource some of those things, but, on a daily basis, depending upon what branch of agriculture you're in, farmers have to wear lots and lots of hats. And I think too many people, they're just a farmer. Now, driving down the road and you see $1 million tractor or combine in the field, some people probably don't think that anymore, but I think there's still a misperception that if you don't have anything else you can go do, just go farm.
And as you and I get a little longer in the tooth and more gray in our beard, the words that Paul Harvey did in his On the Eighth Day, even though the words are dated and some of the things that he highlights are out of date, the words are still applicable. I think your point of the robustness of the talents that a typical farmer has is truly unappreciated.
Absolutely.
What is your favorite ag tool, product, or innovation?
Well, as a geneticist, I should probably say a computer, but I think the smartphone has this not necessarily just the smartphone, but all the applications that go along with a smartphone. I can remember when I first started, I didn't have a smartphone, and I was excited when I got a vibrating battery for it, so I could put it on silent and it would still vibrate and I could know somebody was calling me. The only game on it was Snake. I mean, that's just a Nokia 31 whatever, and I had a BlackBerry, I had an Android, switched to an iPhone, and I mean, just all the apps that go along with it, and people will say, well, do you have this app or do you have that app? And there's a lot of them that I don't have because I don't really want them, but it's come in so handy traveling. I mean, you're standing in line somewhere in a faraway land and flight gets canceled, delayed. You can make phone calls. You can send emails, text, and just be able to communicate. And I guess one of the big things is back early in my tenure here, my daughter was in dance and my wife had an Android. She'd upgraded to an iPhone. And I was sitting outside the Beijing Friendship Hotel in downtown Beijing, watching my daughter at her dance on FaceTime. Now, I will say, over the video, she was just one of 12 blonde blobs up on the dance floor. But I'd been to the rehearsal a few days before, so I kind of knew the general area of where she was. So just those kinds of things that it keeps you in contact, maybe too much at times. I mean, people can always get a hold of you. But, just the things that you can do on them now that, I can remember the first cell phone my dad ever got. He didn't want it. It was a bag phone. Didn't want it, and it came with 30 minutes a month or whatever. I mean, we never went through those, but it came in really handy. You're at the field, something happens, make a phone call. You're in town, hey, call, and saves you a trip back to town. I just think the smartphone has taken that way beyond what anybody could have imagined, and just the amount of things you can do on it. There's lots of other things we could talk about, but I was going to say auto steer, but I've never been in a tractor with auto steer, so I figured I'd just say the iPhone.
Great answer. So the last question, what is one small change that can make a big impact in ag's future?
I can't remember if you've had any guests answer this way or not, but as I've thought through this, that, and it goes back to our conversation about the Dadson family. We've got to tell our story. Everybody talks, they see a farmer spraying, putting on fertilizer or hog manure or whatever, and, you guys are polluting the world and all those kinds of things. But I can't remember where I was, but one of the speakers said, pork production has the greatest sustainability story in history, and nobody tells it. You grow a crop, you feed the pigs, you use the manure to fertilize the crop for the next year. It's just a very neat closed loop of sustainability. And we just don't tell that story enough. That to me is something we've just, everybody gets shy about, things in our industry that maybe aren't as sexy or consumer appealing, but we've just got to be able to, and okay, if you want to leave some of those things out, that's fine. But just the big story around agriculture is one that we've got to tell.
And that's a tough one, because on one hand you have checkoff organizations, and I'm using that in quotes, that try and have a message, and then you have some radical farmer that's got a message. So, but the basics of what we do, is particularly in the pork industry, that sustainability is huge. And I think the number that you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast is 70%. I think we're using 70% less resources. Where else in our world are we using 70% less of anything? I sure know it's not cardboard because of all the Amazon boxes it is.
If you don't have a delivery, does your Amazon driver still stop and check on you to make sure you're okay?
No, but we have an Amazon driver that has been here when sheep are out. And every time that particular Amazon driver comes to our house, he sends that message. Amazon driver coming to your house, make sure pets or livestock are contained.
We've gotten that a couple of times. Make sure your dogs are put away. And I just text him back. His name's Russell, and he'll lick you to death. So he's fine.
Oh. Well, Doug, this has been a great conversation. I love your perspective as a geneticist, a farm boy, and an influencer of youth. I think you've got the full picture of the swine industry and kind of have a nice little path forward for us on getting those youth involved wherever we can in the industry. I'm looking forward to what you can do for the industry internationally, and I'm looking forward to hopefully traveling with you to Vietnam this fall.
Yep, I've got my connection. Kim is supposed to be working on it for me, so I got to get back in touch with her and see what we can get worked out.
Great. Well, thanks for spending some time on the patio with us. We'll have to have you over and we'll pull out some bourbon and enjoy that.
Absolutely.